vandalism and lawful conduct. Lacan added that she has no objection to citizens recording police interactions in public spaces. Assistant Superintendent of Police Ishmael Pitt, head of the TTPS Social and Welfare Association, echoed those views, saying the association has long supported the use of body cameras. He said officers perform a public function and, once they are not being obstructed, members of the public are free to record police activity. However, Pitt cautioned that recordings can sometimes lack context or be presented in ways that unfairly shape public perception. Justice C. Prasad made the remarks while delivering a judgment on Monday, raising concerns about eroding public trust in the police service and urging greater transparency through objective recording tools such as body cameras, cell phones, videos, and CCTV footage. Attempts to bring Prime Minister Kamala Persad-Bissessar before the Committee of Privileges were dismissed by Senate President Wade Mark. Mark ruled that submissions from opposition Senator Dr. Amory Brown and independent Senator Anthony Vieira failed to meet the threshold required to be considered matters of privilege. The complaint stemmed from statements made by the Prime Minister last month, in which she accused two independent senators of seeking personal favors in exchange for support of the failed Zone of Special Operations Bill 2026, and referred to them using derogatory terms. Brown and Vieira argued that the allegations were reckless, unsubstantiated, and had brought the Senate into disrepute. Vieira said the claims amounted to accusations of bribery and should have been supported by evidence or referred to law enforcement. Despite the ruling, the issue has sparked continued debate about parliamentary conduct, accountability, and the impact of public accusations on the integrity of the Senate. Prime Minister Kamala Persad-Bissessar has defended a new Housing Development Corporation policy that introduces fees on the transfer and sale of HDC properties. Under the policy, a 5% fee will apply to property transfers following the death of a homeowner, while a 10% fee will apply to sales of HDC homes. The Prime Minister said the move is intended to help the HDC recoup taxpayer funds used to subsidize housing. The policy sparked criticism after former Housing Minister Randall Mitchell described it as an inheritance tax and accused the government of breaking campaign promises. He said the new fees, which replace a flat $700 administrative charge, could now cost families tens of thousands of dollars. Housing Minister David Lee said he was unaware of the policy change and has launched an investigation into how it was approved. The HDC chairman declined to comment on the matter. The issue has reignited debate over housing affordability, government transparency, and whether the new fees unfairly burden homeowners. The Transport Ministry is reviewing the growing use of mobile and windscreen-mounted devices for video calls, recordings, and live streaming while driving. Transport Minister Eli Zacko confirmed in the Senate that the ministry is closely monitoring the trend amid concerns that such practices distract drivers, block visibility, and increase the risk of road accidents. Zacko said while technology continues to advance, a driver's responsibility to maintain full control of a vehicle and focus on the road remains unchanged. He added that the review will determine whether new regulations, clearer definitions, or stronger enforcement are needed. The minister also said recent increases in traffic fines are part of a broader national road safety strategy aimed at reducing distracted driving and improving public safety. Well, that's the news on the hour on WESN. I'm Sean Michael Small. Thanks for watching.
Join the face of sports host Andre Batiste alongside his NFL co-host Sean Michael Small at the WESN Super Bowl watch party. The location, Murray's on Moco Rapa Road, Super Bowl 60, Patriots versus Seahawks. Join us to watch the conclusion of a great season of American football, the spectacle of the halftime show, and the phenomenon of Super Bowl ads. 6 p.m. February 8th, Murray's on Moco Rapa Road. See you there.
WESN. Welcome to Talking Point. Sean Michael Small here. And one of the things that I want to get through quick before we welcome our guest this morning is the fact that, well, there's an old saying, which, to be honest, I don't always like. Can't make an omelette without breaking some eggs. And the thing is, when you have issues with regards to how government is going, how public finances are going, how certain industries are going, particularly industries that are difficult to commercialize. You know, it's not necessarily easy challenges to find solutions for. One of those situations, I believe, and what makes it in a way harder is it's not necessarily critical to survival, right? It's not like education or crime or the general economy where you want a government to try and solve that. You have a society that needs to be all in on that. I'm speaking about carnival and the fact that there are aspects of carnival which, in my opinion, have not been in a healthy space for quite some time. Now, the private sector, aspects of it at least, financially, is in a healthy space. Some people might want to say, well, the only thing that's healthy is the big bands and the beads and feathers and the soca artists. And to some extent, that's true. That is arguably the limitations of the private sector. They will go after profits because, psychologically speaking, profits is not an unreasonable determination of where a vast majority of the public is expressing they want resources allocated to because there's a demand for certain things. So now we have to consider those of us who might be concerned about the less commercially viable aspects of carnival, or to put it a different way, the aspects of carnival that we have yet to make commercially viable as much as beads and feather masks and soca. What's left for them? Because the general consumption by the public is kind of indicating somewhat of a waning level of demand. Maybe it's bottomed out and it won't go any further. Maybe there are far more people who want to see these aspects. Now, to what extent are you willing to pay for it, right? It's very difficult to do things for free because that will always limit on some level what it is it's supposed to be, and welcomes certain amounts of mismanagement if you're just saying, well, we'll just use public funds to deal with it. So there's aspects of carnival that's not controlled by the private sector, not determined by the private sector, in part because it's harder to make a profit out of it. And profit is not an evil word. It's a word. Greed for profit is where things go bad. Private sector needs to make a profit. Public sector doesn't make a profit, and that at times leads you to inefficiencies. And dare I say, how the NCC and government's aspect of carnival has been trudging along throughout the years is inefficient. Because if there was some, you have to balance the want for profit, because to some extent you're doing it for a social good, so profit is the bottom line. But those profit incentives do speak to efficiency, viability, and also just, you know, a higher degree of execution. It's fine to do the same things, have the same products, the same offerings. Are we getting the best performance? Now, when it's the private sector and things about profit, there is a built-in incentive to get the best execution, right? Otherwise, at some point, whatever service is being provided or product is being offered might get bypassed as someone doing it better. But in the public sector, do we necessarily have that level of agency with regards to trying to ensure the situation is as good as it could possibly be? So the current Minister of Culture, I don't necessarily have an issue with her, at least I didn't, with seeing some growing pains with how the government handles carnival. That said, I'm not entirely sure if I would agree with her statements in response to the Mayor of San Fernando. Now, she's saying that they've consistently received $700,000 in funding over the past 3 years. And why is it now that you are coming out to say that you're not having a launch because you don't have sufficient funding. Now, apparently it was interpreted that there was an indication that less funding was required because the mayor was saying that there were going to be cutbacks. And I think what the mayor is saying basically is, listen, we've been trying to do carnival at a certain level and we've been underfunded. So I guess now we're going to maybe have to have some cutbacks in order to ensure that we're not overstretching ourselves, right? I'm not entirely sure exactly how the money was spent, what the accounting books were, if somehow they found other funds to make up any shortfalls or if they have to shortchange anything, right? So the minister said you cannot be getting the same funding and scaling back the activity. My issue is, while I don't necessarily have an issue with hard choices being made, I do question, is she fully aware of what's going on and analyze the situation? Because you have to ask, what is the motivation of scaling back? Is it to scale back activities to meet a level of funding that you deem to be otherwise inefficient to go any further? Or is it scaling back activities for some other purpose? And this is where now, you know, I am not directly involved in the situation, so I can't necessarily say who is right or wrong. But I was willing, and I'm still willing, to give the minister a chance. But I don't necessarily like that now we've reached a point where we get into a political he said, she said. And this might end up, and unfortunately, you don't necessarily want to judge people based on association or based on what you see an entire group doing. Every individual in that group must be doing the same thing. Or what you perceive to be the group doing, every individual in that group must be doing the same thing. To some extent, that's stereotyping. That's stereotyping and that's stigmatizing. However, in the political environment that we live in, we don't see a lot of examples of various political bodies that are not aligned coming together. And in fact, we've even seen in some cases where you would assume they would be in alignment because they are of the same political party, but because they're different bodies, their agenda seemingly does not align. It's just how that's communicated in the past when you've had a central government, local government being under the same party, but somehow things, they don't seem 100%, right? But the smaller, the little brother's not going to complain as much. Now in this case, you have the mayor of San Fernando and the minister of culture at this 11th hour essentially getting into a disagreement, but it's a major disagreement about funding for Carnival. The minister pointed to the amount of money being spent, but I think on some level that's a little bit arbitrary, to be honest. Those who might know better, who have been involved in government projects, might be able to better determine how efficient the spending has been. Have we been able to accomplish anything? It's not necessarily to accomplish profits, but have you been able to offer the public something that is worth the 137 million of direct allocations for this year? Now, I would argue that events in the Savannah seemingly are very much well subscribed to. The public comes out to go to the Savannah, to go to those events. It leaves me personally somewhat annoyed when I'm trying to leave my house and I have to drive past this large amount of traffic. Although generally speaking, it hasn't been that big of a deal. My concern is if you keep growing events in the Savannah and you don't have a traffic management plan that's better than the current situation, you're going to be asking for trouble at some point. The minister also said that there's no immediate plan to tax artists. That is something that you need to be very careful about. Not saying that artists shouldn't pay their fair share in taxes, but again, not all artists are in the same boat, just in Carnival alone. And you have to be careful not to cause too many big changes too soon, and you could upset the apple cart and end up damaging the industry that you're looking at and saying, oh, well, how much is there to take from here? You know, for the sake of being fair. That said, it is surprising that, you know, you have a government minister saying, well, there's actually a tax that we're not going to implement. All right, okay. But I appreciate that because to me, that's not just going along with the flow. not just having a blind agenda, at least in this one space. So I'm hoping that's an indicator that there's a bit more strategic thinking in the Ministry of Culture. With that said, speaking about strategic thinking, yes, it's going to be very difficult to not go a day given how the government's been running, and we'll speak about all of this later on from the perspective with my guest as well. But I just wanted to point out some things because the government Minister of Homeland Security had a press conference yesterday. I'll try and be brief, right? Because there's now, like the Minister of Culture, now he's being a bit more responsible in what he has to say. However, I think one of the things that he might not be aware of is one, damage was already done. So you dug yourself a hole, you kind of need to do extra effort to dig yourself out. I don't know if he perceives that he's dug himself in a hole. And two, some of his statements dig that hole, in my opinion, further deeper. So he has made the claim the government is not here to cover up anything done by any agency, especially under my responsibility. We are here to ensure that law and order and justice must fall where it's supposed to, and not designed by persons to encourage it. That's a direct quote, right? Now, he goes on to say, having said that, as soon as the file with respect to information is finished, I know it will be sent to the relevant authority. Most of the time, not all the time, the DPP, he will make the decision, the government will stand by, and the chips will fall where they may. One of the issues I have is, ironically, he's pointing to the DPP, but the issue is not necessarily with the office with the DPP, because we have heard of 3 investigations, the Professional Standards Bureau, the PCA, and First Division officer. The problem is, there's been not enough, historically speaking, to show that those measures are enough. So then, it doesn't matter if you're willing to go with whatever the DPP says, if something goes wrong before files are sent to the DPP's office. It could be a lack of proficiency in investigation, which at the very least we have to question, because a lack of results in cases like this seems to be a historical pattern, and both long-term or in the distant past and in the recent past. But also, if there is any funny business, it can happen well before the DPP's office comes up, and then it's very convenient that you look past the investigative stage and point the public to the DPP. Yeah, he'll determine the veracity of what's going on, but he will only do so based on the evidence that he is presented with. As far as I'm aware, the DPP's office doesn't investigate anything. He went on to say further, while acknowledging that he didn't say this. The report says that they acknowledge emotions remain raw. Alexander cautioned against a complete loss of confidence in law enforcement, urging the public not to judge the entire service based on a single incident. The reason why I want to bring that up is it's not a single incident. It's not. There is a triple homicide that was at least partially caught on tape from about 4 years ago that is now up before the courts. To be fair, that is an example of the investigative process actually accomplishing what it's meant to accomplish. However, we also have the Moruga triple homicide, and dare I ask, the service, in this case, not the government, right? Not everything is the government's fault, right? The service. What is the explanation for the deaths of those 3 people, since officially the police officers, who I believe it's a matter of public record, those 3 people were in their custody? I'm not entirely sure if somehow the case proved or showed or disproved that those 3 weren't in the custody of the accused officers. Exactly what is the official explanation of their deaths? Someone please tell me what it is, right? And part of the issue is, I think the minister doesn't understand the situation that he's in. Quote, I don't want to talk too much about a matter that is engaging the type of attention we are seeing now. However, police officers are trained to de-escalate a situation. And this is the digging the hole deeper comes along. Because someone tell me, where's the de-escalation attempt in the video that we have seen? And one of the things the minister does not seem to understand is, if that video wasn't released the public wouldn't know how bad it is. It seems in my mind he is regretting that the video was ever released because he's just thinking we won't have this public brouhaha. Blame the video. Not necessarily putting two and two together. It's not that the video was released outside of their control. The video looks so damning, and you have yet to offer anything reasonable to assuage the fears of the public. And in fact, you have even made it out that you are complicit in an attempted cover-up, and then you want to say there is no cover-up. It's difficult. Not that he is trying to cover it up, but his words and actions give the appearance that. So any claims to the contrary kind of seems very weak. But saying that police are trained to de-escalate a situation when there's video evidence that they didn't de-escalate the situation, they shot first and asked questions later, I don't know. He went on to also say police officers must also be recognized as victims after violent confrontations. Now, a further quote, right? With regards to the investigation, evidence, not emotion, must guide the process. We don't have evidence of a violent confrontation with regards to an exchange. We only have evidence of a violent confrontation that was very one-sided. In that context, regardless of whatever the truth is, you have to know what the public sees, what the public perceives, how they might perceive that and other statements in the future linked to that, and then determine how we are going to try to communicate to the public. And throwing out things like this that has nothing to support it makes everything you say look extremely hollow and makes everything you say look like an attempt to cover up the truth is not smart. There's no other way to put it. This is me being as diplomatic as possible in the situation. This is not smart public relations strategy. This is not anything that even begins to look like transparency. Police officers are victims too. In a situation where it looks as though 3 police officers gunned down someone who's trying to surrender, that you can't tell the public that and expect a positive response. It's just not reasonable. And it makes it look as though you're defending a bad situation far too much. Because I understand it. It seems like the Commissioner and the Minister of Homeland Security are trying to be fair. But what they don't realize is they appear to be blind to the bigger picture. When you're dealing with the public, it is not about what is fair on the micro level, and if they don't understand, to hell with them. That's not how this works. You can't then tell the people, don't lose faith in the whole service based on the actions of 1 or 2 or 3 officers. That's not how this works, especially when there are multiple incidents. Case in point, and I'll try and wrap up with this. Case in point, there was a schoolboy that apparently was hospitalized after a scuffle with police. Now, when you read the story, it's not necessarily clear who's at fault. It could very well have been the schoolboy because he cursed the officers, which means I believe on some level cursing in public, laws on our books, right? They have a right now to potentially, detain him, speak to him, whatever, and then if he attempts to further struggle, he's putting himself in a worse situation. Don't ever physically try to struggle with police unless you think they're fake police and they're about to kill you, because Minister Sage gave us sage advice. But that's a joke. The reality is, in a situation like this, if they want to detain you, physically struggling with them, not a good sign. However, he was hospitalized as a schoolboy. And given the context of everything that has happened, both recently and in the last few years, I don't know if I could continue to give the TTPS in general, the service, the benefit of the doubt. I want to give the TTPS the benefit of the doubt. But there's a Jekyll and Hyde situation. There's the TTPS, the protect and serve. They have the media ambassadors. They know what they're doing. They actually accomplish things in policing. They sometimes intercept robbers, in the moment as the crime is done. They're able to catch murderers. They're able to catch child predators. All of these things, all of these accomplishments. And then there's the service. the silent service in the police force. And to what extent, how far does that go? How severe are their actions? We don't know. But we see some things that leaves us questioning everything, unfortunately, because there hasn't been anything sufficient enough to reasonably explain what's going on, to account for what's going on, to ensure that things are not going out of control. Meanwhile, civil society is protesting the American embassy over the blockade of Cuba. I have no problem with this. You believe in something, go ahead and protest it. My issue is, once again, when it comes to our internal issues, where are the protests? Because there were some protesters over the murder, but a lot of them were friends and family. That's to be expected. This is a wider issue, though, than just personal concerns of the friends and family. This is a national issue. Where is the support from the national public physically? Because if you don't send a strong message to the government, they will get the opinion, well, maybe we could ignore it. I don't know if this is something that we want to be ignored. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll welcome our guest. We'll continue the conversation with regards to how all of this has been going, and perhaps sneak in a few topics. Stay tuned. Talking Point will be right back after this.
Join the Face of Sports host, Andre Batiste, alongside his NFL co-host, Sean Michael Small, at the WESN Super Bowl watch party. The location, Murray's on Mocha Rapa Road, Super Bowl 60, Patriots versus Seahawks. Join us to watch the conclusion of a great season of American football, the spectacle of the halftime show, and the phenomenon of Super Bowl ads. 6 p.m. February 8th, Murray's on Mocha Rapa Road. See you there.
Hi, I am Emiliana Beechan, and I am a mental health and conflict resolution consultant. Welcome to Mind Matters, the show where we explore the intricate world of mental health and the art of conflict resolution. Join us as we hear from mental health professionals, conflict resolution experts, and everyday people who have transformed their lives through understanding and communication. Mind Matters, coming soon to WESN Content Capital.
Last year, you had the time of your life. This year will be even more fantastic. Get your tickets now for Gone But Not Forgotten 2.
I feel like home.
They gave us the memory.
Woman, you could run away too.
They gave us the rhythms of life. Now let's give them their flowers.
Trinidad and Tobago, join us for a special tribute to our legendary musical icons who have passed on in Gone But Not Forgotten.
Including Bunny, Swallow, Singing Francine, Shadow, Arrow, Maestro, Rootsman, Lax, Sandoli, Rash Shorty Eye, plus lots more. Their music still lives on in our heart. An unforgettable night as we celebrate their legacy in Gone But Not Forgotten. Wednesday, February 4th at Napa and Thursday, February 5th at Sapa. Showtime both nights, 6:30 p.m. Your master of ceremonies, Sonny Bling.
Tickets $300 and $250.
Early bird tickets bought by Monday, January 26th, cost $50 less.
Available at Crosby's, Jumbo Foods Barataria, Mart's Liquor Palace, Diego Martin Main Road, all Kenny Sports, Western Union, Tuna Buna, all Extra Foods, Athletes by the Park, and IslandEtickets.com. An extra $10 off for online purchases. For more info, call 732-3402. Gone, but not forgotten.
And we're back here on Talking Point. Sean Michael Small here to have the conversations with you And I just want to say this up front, Talking Point will always have its doors open, because I'm sure there are going to be people, why don't you have X, why don't you have Y? Particularly when they see who we have on today. Because joining us to speak about, generally speaking, let's just say crime and some of the recent happenings with regards to what's been going on, we have Opposition Chief with no stranger to WSN and the program, Mr. Marvin Gonzalez. Good morning, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Sean. Good morning, Trinidad and Tobago. Good morning to your viewing and I guess your listening audience. Thank you for the opportunity for joining you on this program and to exchange some ideas and views on the many issues that we have confronting our nation at this point in time. So thank you very much for that.
So one of the first things where we could start off is, generally speaking, in terms of Parliament, the big story was, of course, the ZOSO legislation, which they have people who support the concept, but even they have questions about the implementation. And then, of course, recent events, I would have argued, potentially affected the perception of such a legislation, because when you have some people saying, well, we're concerned about abuse, right? Now, it could be political abuse or it could be abuse by the police. However, the investigation of the shooting turns out, the problem is that is not necessarily a great example to say, oh, you don't have to worry about things being abused, right? Also, I guess, just this is an extension of state of emergencies in a different form, and on some level, to keep going with it, I'm sure a lot of members of the public have questions with regards to why. What did you make of the legislation and your response to it?
Well, first, let me start by saying that when this legislation was laid in the Parliament, the opposition basically had 3 days to look at the legislation and to arrive at a position. The legislation was in fact laid in the Parliament 3 days before the actual sitting on the Friday. We were taken aback by it because on reading the legislation, and we saw the impact that it is going to have and it can potentially have on life in Trinidad and Tobago, we assumed that a responsible government would have engaged in the appropriate consultation with not only with the opposition, the Law Association, and so many interest groups, given the potential constitutional impact that the legislation can have on the way of life in Trinidad and Tobago. That was not the case. The opposition, the government, laid this very critical and constitutionally consequential bill on the order of paper, together with 2 other important bills. The motor vehicles and road traffic bill that saw the increases in traffic fines by over 100%, 95% in many cases, or over 100%. And there was an amendment to the THA Act. The THA amendment wasn't controversial, but that bill was also taken on that particular day. So there were 3 bills to be debated. So by the time we got to the ZOSO bill, as it is famously referred to now, it was the last bill on the order paper on that sitting. So we debated the motor vehicle and road traffic bill. I think we had 3 speakers. We debated the THA bill. And by the time we got to the ZOSO bill, I recall it was around 10:30 p.m. on that night, or 11 o'clock on that night. The government, Sean, only came prepared to put in 2 speakers on that very important bill. The opposition, through me as the chief whip in the Parliament, indicated to the government that all of our members are prepared to speak on this very important bill because we needed to highlight the importance and the impact of this bill on the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. The government only came prepared to enter or put in rather 2 speakers. So the government from the very on, and the reason why I'm saying it is because I want the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, I want you to understand the approach of this government, and it's not only in the ZOSO bill, but I want the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago to understand the approach of this government as it relates to its legislative agenda and the passage of very important bills that can impact the lives and of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. The government simply doesn't want to collaborate. They simply don't want to meet with key stakeholders, etc. And that is very unfortunate. It is very unfortunate because the opposition, we represent thousands of people. We were voted by over 200,000 people. So we represent over 200,000 people, and many more who support the PNM may not necessarily be members. So the opposition is an important constituency in this regard, and you would not expect a government to approach this very important bill in a very haphazard, nonchalant, and disrespectful, I dare say.
Well, with what you just said, the first thing that came to mind was one of the initial debates where there was some questionable decision making on how it unfolded, because when the budget was presented, basically that night everyone was saying, well, okay, we'll get the details in the debate when the various line ministers speak. And then what happened was it was wound up before certain ministers were able to
ever enter debate.
Exactly.
And no willingness whatsoever to enter into the debate. So it's the same. This government started off its tenure in a very how should I say, a very suspicious manner in the way in which they open themselves to accountability and transparency, the way in which they go to Parliament and invoke standing orders not to account and not to speak to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. And hopefully during this discussion, I get some time to go into that. But it's exactly what transpired with the Zozo bill, because before that bill, when the government put in two or three speakers, I indicated to the government and the deputy speaker who was presiding over the sitting at that point in time that I had X amount of speakers. The deputy speaker, unfortunately, at a critical point in the debate at around 3:30 a.m., looked to the Attorney General to stand and wind up the contributions, or rather to bring an end to the debate. When that happened, MP Colm Imbut was already on his legs attempting to get the speaker's attention so that he can enter into the debate. And that was ignored. And the Attorney General was allowed to wind up the debate when we had at least three more speakers to speak on the various clauses of the bill so that the people of Trinidad and Tobago can understand what the government was seeking to do at 3:30 a.m. in the morning. So they came to Parliament, they laid this bill 3 days before, no consultation with the opposition. We raised a number of issues during the debate, completely ignored. And as far as they were concerned, we have the majority. We will pass this bill regardless of whatever you say. And this is how the government dealt with the matter. So they passed the bill at around 4 a.m. that morning. And before the ink could have dried on the passage of the bill in the lower house, the Prime Minister came out and launched a scathing attack on the independent senators. The bill did not even reach the upper house as yet. They railroad the bill through the lower house at 3:30 a.m. in the morning when most of you were asleep. Couldn't listen to the contributions to understand the impact that this bill can have on your lives. And before, as the bill makes its way to the Senate, the Prime Minister launched a scathing attack on the independent senators, calling their professionalism into question, as well as the President of the Republic.
Now,
so what transpired in the Senate on this bill?
Well, that's the
and
thing.
The death.
Because as you said that, I said in the past, so for people to understand, this is not just me piggybacking on what you said or agreeing with you in the moment.
Yes.
I said in the past, why are you seemingly rushing things? Because the AG basically indicated, and I don't know necessarily the specific details, but he indicated, oh, well, you have amendments, nothing wrong with the amendments, but we just don't have time to debate the amendments. And to me, when you combine that with what you just said on the timing of how it went from the lower house and the process to go to the upper house, I thought, why is the AG pushing this as a matter of we need to get this done quickly? Because as you pointed out, and as I pointed out in the past, something at this level, we're not talking about a bill to change the color of the coat of arms from red to dark red. We're talking about suspending the rights and freedoms of citizens. You would hope that they would do it, it would get the time necessary to the point where the government should be saying, opposition, is there enough time on this? Members of the public, is there enough time on this? Independent, because you don't want to be accused of just rushing things and
Sean, sorry to cut you, and that is exactly what we're trying to tell the government, that this bill is a very consequential bill that ought not and cannot be rushed, because the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago need to understand its potential impact on our lives. And all we were telling the government, imagine you laid this bill 3 days before the sitting. Now, there were excerpts of that bill circulating on social media. Because of some leak in the Attorney General's office when they were putting the bill together. You know something, Sean? I didn't take it seriously. I thought it was just fake news. I thought it was just somebody trying to create mischief. And the government could not commit something like this without consultation. And I was wrong. I was completely wrong, because I believe with all of the flaws of this government, I expected the government to be a little bit more responsible, especially with an Attorney General who's a senior counsel, and a Prime Minister who's also a senior counsel, and understanding the importance of consulting with stakeholders and bringing the confidence of the people with you, taking the confidence of the people with you in the passage of consequential legislation. And it simply did not happen. They came to Parliament and they had no intention whatsoever to take on board amendments, take on board sensible contributions coming from the independents, coming from the opposition, coming from the law association. They had absolutely no intention whatsoever. So the lower house, if you look at the debate, MPs were disrespected by members of the government when we raised critical issues, by the Attorney General. And what transpired in the Senate, I was not surprised, because the government, from the very start, demonstrated that it was not prepared to take on board recommendations from anyone on this particular matter.
Well, there's a couple things, though, because in a way, it almost seems like the government was inconsistent with its own motivations. Because on one hand, it seems as though the AG is of the mind, we need this bill passed as soon as possible in order to give us cover from the moment the SOE ends, because we have these PDOs and we don't want to let these guys out. Now, whether that is a worthy reason or not, ironically, should also be debated, in my opinion. But then there's the fact that the Prime Minister attacking the independent bench up front. She does it before the debate could happen, before she could see how they're going to vote, or even what they're going to say. So in my opinion, that's premature. Why are you being combative up front? You're assuming, I get it. We could all assume that they would have said X or they could have said Y. But why kind of make the situation locked in at that point and seemingly have no desire to even attempt to negotiate? Because I always say, you should do your part. If the other side doesn't want to negotiate in good faith, you could always point and say, look at what we did. We tried. But it seemed as though she didn't want to try. She was willing to just basically condemn the independent bench and let the chips fall their way. And it's very hard to think, why would they side with you if that's how you're going to start things off? And in my mind, it makes me wonder if they even intended this bill to pass in the first place. Because
I asked myself the same question, whether or not it was designed, whether or not the Prime Minister hoped for that bill to fail so that they can go on the offensive to attack independent senators, to attack the PNM, to attack all stakeholders, and to blame them for any spike in the crime rate. And it felt as though that was the whole objective of the Prime Minister, because when you look at the voting patterns of the independent bench, they have supported most of the legislation brought by the government, most. So even when they were also under heavy attack by the UNC and by the Prime Minister, they supported the government in their legislative agenda in most of the bills that they have brought to the Senate. So the basis for attacking the independent senators on this occasion in the way that it was done by the Prime Minister and to refer to them as bootlickers and other derogatory terms, it felt as though the Prime Minister was either using psychological warfare to frighten the independents into supporting the bill, regardless of however they felt about it, or the Prime Minister was setting the stage deliberately for the bill to fail so that other people, apart from her government, can be blamed for the government not putting a comprehensive crime or plan in place to combat criminality and to improve the administration of justice in Trinidad and Tobago. That's the only conclusion I can arrive at, because it was just very bizarre in the way in which this government approached not only this matter, there's so many other matters, critical matters that they have approached similarly. But the collapse of the Zozo bill is just one example of the government using its majority in the parliament to try to have its way and to muzzle the voices of persons who they believe are opposed to them.
I can't remember how many amendments in total there was, but I would at least beg the question, the one amendment in my mind, the one safety net insurance policy that you could have put at the very least, and I don't think it would have taken much debate, and this was done with the anti-gang legislation, if my memory serves correct, I could be wrong, not having a sunset clause. The AG tried to defend that situation. He said, well, we don't have it because there's the social programs tied to the bill. I'm like, why are the social programs necessarily having to be in the same piece of legislation? You could split it. You could split it.
Exactly. Exactly.
So my thing is, that to me seems low-hanging fruit. If for anything you could have told the independent bench, look, we understand your concerns are valid, it's a timing issue, but we'll agree to put in a sunset clause so that you could have the assurance that this is not, because to me, assessing it, but you still now have to proactively vote to take it off the books, is not
correct.
The same level of insurance.
You would expect that to be reasonable. But you raised the issue of a sunset clause, which I think was also a very reasonable argument, because here's the independent saying, listen, this is new to us. We are not, our society is not like Jamaica, because you've imported this legislation by and large from Jamaica, but it's a completely different society that we are dealing with. We are prepared to meet you on the half with all of the concerns that we are expressing, but put in a sunset clause and let us see how the impact of this bill will have. Well, let us examine a year or 2 years from now the impact of this kind of legislation on the society of Trinidad and Tobago. And after 2 years, we will come back to Parliament, assess its impact, its suitability, its success or lack thereof, and we will make a determination insofar as how we move forward. And a sunset clause in legislation is not foreign to us in Trinidad and Tobago. I think we have amended the bill and the Bail Act on numerous occasions. We've inserted sunset clauses. This current government, the PNM government, and so a sunset clause is not foreign to us. But not even that. But there's another critical part of this bill that not only the government, the independents, but the PNM expressed serious concerns about. What this bill was also seeking to do is to give the Prime Minister executive power to declare a zone outside of the parliamentary process, where she can declare a zone for 180 days with the impact of curfew, etc. And all that the government is required to do is to make a statement in the parliament. No debate whatsoever. No parliamentary scrutiny. The parliament, you get up in the morning, a zone is declared by the Prime Minister in council, and there is no parliamentary scrutiny, no scrutiny on the part of the head of state and the government. That is in clause 5 of the bill. That is what the government was expecting, for the Prime Minister to have such a power. And this can be further extended by 180 days by the Prime Minister signing an order. And at that point in time, then the matter comes into the Parliament after 100 days, if she's seeking to extend it by a further 180 days. Then an order is laid in the Parliament and it's debated, and it is sure of passage because the government is using its majority to be passed. But for the first 180 days, the Prime Minister exercising such the intrusive types of powers in Trinidad and Tobago without any scrutiny or intervention of the Parliament. And the opposition, as well as some of the independents, propose amendments where the Prime Minister will have to account to the Parliament on the declaration of a zone from the very first instance. And they did not even want that. Now, mind you, this is the Prime Minister who said, kill them violently, without any shred of evidence. Without any shred of evidence.
The proposed amendment, was it that she would declare a Zozo, or he, right, whoever the Prime Minister is, and then basically right after the declaration, she would have to account for it? So it's not as though...
In the Parliament.
Right, because I think there seems to be an agenda in the government, and I'm not using that for the public. I just want to say I'm not using it as a bad word. The whole, it seems like the government has this idea that crime fighting needs to be faster. So I can understand that you don't necessarily want to come to Parliament and say, we want to declare this area a zone.
It doesn't make sense. Right. It doesn't make law enforcement sense. You don't want to give the criminals an upper hand.
Right, but at the same time, it's fine, you declare a zone, law enforcement goes in, but then like the next day,
you come to Parliament and you explain to the Parliament the information provided to you by the Chief of Defence Staff, by the security arms of the state, and you justify to the elected members of the Parliament why you had to declare a zone in a particular area. How difficult is that?
Now,
it's...
So, with regards to the Zozo bill, there's another thing I wanted to get to. The AG, of course, he mentioned the social programs. But the Minister of Defense, curiously, it wasn't the Minister of Homeland Security that was publicly presenting, or at least that's how it seemed to me, right? The Minister of Defense is the one piloting this bill. Am I correct on that? Not the Minister of Homeland Security. He basically tried to justify the whole situation, saying, don't worry about it, 2 to 3 years, we'll solve crime thanks to this bill. And I find that to be very weird when those who actually like the concept of zones of special operations, they weren't necessarily agreeing that this is something that's just going to magically solve crime in 2 to 3 years. You lock up gang leaders and somehow magically crime is going to be solved. Particularly when recently we had an SOE where the complaint was, well, the guys on remand in maximum security prison, they're still running crime, and we need to take them to the army barracks to try to isolate them. So I didn't understand, one, how the Minister of Defense thought that this would work with the way how he described it, and two, he seemed to be thinking this is a short-term measure when even the AG to some extent, plus a lot of other third-party speakers, not members of the opposition or even the independent bench, but third-party speakers were pointing to, including someone I believe involved with the Jamaican legislation itself, saying this is not a quick fix. This is something that you have to implement properly and put work into over time in order to solve crime.
Yeah, and the comments of the Minister of Defense, I can see in that bill, in that debate, did not help the government. As a matter of fact, he made some outrageous statements that I would commend, or rather recommend, members of the public to go and listen to the contribution of the Minister of Defense on this particular issue. And by the way, this was meant to be a law enforcement issue to deal with crime and criminality in Trinidad and Tobago. And you had to ask yourself why the Minister of Homeland Security didn't take the lead in this debate. Exactly. Because the police is going to play a major role in some of these communities that they intended to declare zones of special operations. The Minister of Homeland Security, if he spoke, I don't think he spoke in that debate, period. He did not. So, but I mean, the Minister of Homeland Security has a very poor record in speaking in the Parliament on critical matters that fall within his domain. So that wasn't surprising to us. But let's go back. Let's go back to the Jamaica situation. He was using the Jamaican model as an example as to why this will likely succeed. When you speak to the key players in Jamaica on this particular matter, they told you that the bill, when it was implemented in Jamaica, had minimal success. The Prime Minister, in a recent commentary, I think it was at the United Nations General Assembly, and he indicated that some of these interventions made by Jamaica only resulted in short-term measures. And as soon as they were removed, there was a corresponding spike in crime. And that the Jamaican government needed to look and continue to look at long-term solutions towards treating with crime and criminality at its root causes, because some of these interventions like Zozo and other things only resulted in short-term benefits. And as soon as they were removed, it resulted in an escalation in criminal activity. Now, if you go to the Jamaican bill, some of the things that we have been advocating for, and we suggested to the government that they should include in the Trinidad's bill, the government refused. So, for example, the Police Complaints Authority and the Police Service Commission exercise control, and they are independent constitutional bodies that exercise control over the operations of the police service, especially where you have extrajudicial killings and discipline, etc., investigations. The Police Complaints Authority will come in and they will conduct their own investigation, and they will make recommendations either for disciplinary proceedings to be instituted against police officers, criminal charges, etc. The same way the Police Service Commission exercises disciplinary control over the commissioner and certain first division officers. With the implementation of Zozo in the legal landscape in Trinidad and Tobago, we told the government that we needed to ensure that the PCA, that there are amendments to the PCA, Police Complaints Authority Act, as well as the Police Service Commission constitutional amendments, so that they can exercise similar types of jurisdiction over defense force officers, because defense force officers will be exercising powers of police officers in these matters. This was refused. In Jamaica, you have an office or an independent body that has powers over defense force officers and members of the police service who are operating within a Zozo type of arrangement. The government, a simple recommendation like that was also refused. And you know what is also alarming? There's a provision in the Zozo bill for police officers and members of the defense force to use body cams or body cameras, not mandatory, but optional. They may use it, and that will be subject to the available resources of the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Homeland Security, or the TTPS, and the Ministry of Defense. So the government in that clause did not even commit to setting aside the appropriate resources so that members of the defense force and members of the TTPS should wear body cams as they go about executing their duties within a zone of special operation. They're saying, well, you can, but that will be subject to whether or not resources are available. It tells you the mindset.
Thank you for bringing that up, because I actually almost forgot. The issue with body cameras did come into question before Mr. Samaru's killing, when the public, I believe I can't remember because what we saw that was leaked might not have actually had that part of it, but it was either said or stated somewhere in those terms, and everybody that saw it, that responded to it, that I got the response, kind of had an eyebrow raised. What do you mean may? And one of my issues with the police executive was that's the language that they have used for quite a few years now to encourage officers to wear the body cameras. And now
Nonsense.
that we've reached at this point, and this is the thing with the Zoso bill, I also think it was a situation, as you pointed out, because I said this as well last week, the Defense Force soldiers also need body cameras. They're out in the public, right? And this is the thing, with legislation like this, and the trust and confidence in the service was already, reportedly at 8% before this came about, right? Not putting things for accountability seems very strange to me, and you have to almost ask the question, why? And then, I guess, I don't know to what extent we should look at it as fate, whether positively or negatively, but you have a situation where if you want to try to give the Commissioner and the Minister of Homeland Security benefit of the doubt, the main issue I have with that is, well, if they only had body cameras, maybe the position of the authorities would have been better reinforced. But as far as we're aware, there is no other angle or other, they probably want to reveal the footage anyway, and I don't necessarily agree with that. But it brought up the question of, well, you're telling us a Nancy story, but you don't have anything to offer. Body cameras would have given us something to offer. And we aren't even in a Zoso situation yet.
And that's the point. And the timing of the Samru killing and the debate and the discussion in the public domain on Zoso, I would say timely. Of course, the Samru killing is a very unfortunate incident, but it sparked the discussion that was already taking place in the public domain with respect to the impact of Zoso on the national landscape. And in the debate, we pointed to the government that here you have a clause in the bill that attempts to treat the issue of body cams to be worn by members of the Defense Force and members of the TTPS who are operating within a Zoso, but you are still leaving it optional to them. You have not prepared yourself to give an undertaking or to make it mandatory within the bill for members of the Defense Force and members of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service to wear body cams who are operating within a Zoso. You are saying that they may, meaning that it is optional. Oh, and by the way, it is optional depending on the resources of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service and the resources of the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force. Exactly. If you listen to the reported explanation of the Commissioner of Police yesterday, that was reported in the papers yesterday, basically saying that we don't have the resources, we don't have the money. We don't know if, given the debts, the outstanding debt of the TTPS, whether or not we're going to have money to purchase body cameras for officers. And if you align that with some statements made by the Minister of Homeland Security himself a couple months ago, when he said, well, the police don't need body cams. What they need is body armor and bulletproof vests. So you have to connect the dots, Sean. And when you connect the dots, you will see clearly where the authorities stand on this very important matter in their legislative making powers, in their utterances, made to the media and the national community, that there is no seriousness on the part of the government or the authorities to ensure that there is accountability in law enforcement in Trinidad and Tobago, that they do not recognize that the use of body cams, it is not something that is going to pit one side against the other, but it protects police officers from unfair allegations on the part of members of the public, and it protects members of the public from a disproportionate use of force on the part of the police, and it engenders and it instills confidence in the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, because that confidence is necessary in order for there to be proper law and order in Trinidad and Tobago. It is very unfortunate that the government came with this Zoso bill and still make it, optional.
Well,
depending on available resources for members of the Defense Force and Police Service operating within a ZOZO to wear body cams.
Well, one of the issues with body cameras as well, the PC, I believe, at one point said they weren't given access to body camera footage in situations where they were they had the knowledge that body camera footage existed, or they were told that body camera footage existed in cases they were investigating. And one of the questions, this is a bit more of a technical question, because I have always taken a bit of an issue with the overall kind of general default stance of, well, we reveal nothing. Open investigation, open case, we can't reveal anything. And I know that there are other jurisdictions, including parts of the United States, where that's the policy. But at the same time, there are areas where the authorities reveal something. Because at 8%,
what's the policy?
well, because it seems as though the TTPS will never reveal body camera footage, even if they have it, to the public. So they want the public to believe that there's more than meets the eye, and you must trust the evidence. But especially in a case like this where, well, we do have some evidence at the very least, right? And you're trying to sell us a different version of events, but you're offering us nothing to believe in. What is the holdup that prevents the police from potentially revealing some footage? Because the whole point of, or part of the point of it is, you reveal the full footage, whether to the courts or whatever, so that on some level, it's not just hidden away. Because there are criticisms in America where they try to hide away the footage from everybody, right? And it takes lawsuits to get the footage revealed. And then different facts of cases come out. And for me, I'm like, it's not just having the cameras, but also I fear, even if we have it, well, the commissioner will just sit on it. I have no reasonable reason to think otherwise. Is there any legal issue? I'm not saying that everything has to be revealed. Obviously, you don't want blood and gore on the 7 o'clock news. But is there any reason why nothing is ever given to the public?
There's an attempt on the part of the authorities to cover up and say, and the explanation is that, well, this is evidence, and this has to go before a court. And if we reveal too much, it can undermine the credibility of the evidence and can unduly affect the minds of potential jurors in the matter. So therefore, it is better we preserve the evidence and not put it out in the public so that potential jurors can be influenced before even someone is charged coming out of the investigation. That to me is a cop-out, it is a cover-up, and it is a convenient tool used by, unfortunately, police officers not to be more transparent with the population. I have seen the Minister of Homeland Security using that same approach, saying essentially that what you have seen is just 10 seconds of an issue or a matter that occurred for maybe half an hour. And you are just seeing a 10-second video. And you have to trust us that we have the rest of the story. But we cannot tell you or give you the information, the rest of the story, because this matter is under investigation and it might impact the credibility of evidence. That is nonsense. That is, sorry, I have to use strong language like this. It is absolute hogwash. It is a cover-up. Anytime someone is coming with that foolish piece of excuse, it is really trying to take the minds of the people and the people for granted. Nothing prevents the police, especially when the public witness video recordings of a particular incident that showed what transpired. Someone with their hands out of the window of a vehicle attempting to surrender to the police, and the police using lethal force that cost the life of a person and someone in the hospital fighting for their life. The police cannot come and say, well, we have information, we have evidence that suggests that they pose a threat, and the response of the police was proportionate to the threat. that these people posed at that point in time. If that was in fact and is in fact the case, then the police at this point in time should have provided enough information to the public to at least satisfy the minds of the public that there was a wider transaction that occurred, and that yes, the 10 seconds or 15 seconds video that we saw, there's another side of it, another part of the puzzle that was critical, that the police put in the public domain so that the people can come to their own conclusion on the matter. And to say, well, we can't show you this because this is under investigation and this is evidence, but trust what we are saying. Don't believe fully what you are seeing. It is foolishness. It is an attempt to cover up. It is using some kind of spurious policy that does not exist anywhere in the standing orders of the police service or in law, not to level with the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And I am telling the people and the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago to dismiss this nonsense being put forward by the Minister of Homeland Security, that don't believe what you are seeing. There's another part of the puzzle, but I cannot share that part of the puzzle with you because the matter is under investigation. At least the police must be prepared, if in fact they have the information and the evidence, to put it in the public domain so that people can come to their own conclusion.
Ironically, the Commissioner and the Minister of Homeland Security seemingly does not necessarily put two and two together. The footage that has been released is basically already prejudicing the public. So one would think if you have evidence to counteract that prejudicial
put it
view...
out. You have to put it out.
Now,
you have to put it out.
as we're coming to a close, one of the things on these issues that I am trying to express, because the whole point of governance, particularly in things like law enforcement, in fact, one of the stakeholders or speakers on the social bill said, you know, you have to have public buy-in. Jamaica, they don't have high trust and confidence in their police, but it's 20 to 30%. And even those that, even the engagement numbers of the public in cooperating with law enforcement and their zones of special operations is actually higher than the trust and confidence rate. And I don't necessarily think we have that luxury here in TNT to some extent. Now, on some level, I think the public needs to speak out more, demand more. But one of the things that I find unfortunate is, and the minister tried to say, don't condemn the whole police service on the actions of a few. The problem is, it's not just this one incident. And there are many police officers that I've interacted with throughout my life, and that we see on TV, and a lot of them are well put together. They know what they're talking about. They have a good case record. Exactly.
Very professional.
Very professional.
Yeah.
And they're essentially being dragged through the mud alongside whatever officer does anything to make it look bad, from slapping a phone out of someone's hands to a shooting incident that the public doesn't have any faith that the right thing was done. And I understand people don't necessarily, you know, they will assume the opposition has some kind of bias, but I've been saying at some point, where is the police service going to even come out and say, look, we need to kind of figure out a way, the members of the police and the public, because don't leave the good officers kind of on an island on their own, to come out and speak out against this, because this is something that I believe we've almost reached the point, potentially a tipping point, where things could get a lot worse. And I don't want to leave it to chance, well, you know, the government will fix it. You know, I could ignore it. I don't know about that anymore. And for police officers, being silent on the matter, I don't know if you would agree with me that on some level now, perhaps they need to start to consider whether through the union or as a collective to let their opinion be known, because I know that there are police officers, including retired ones, that take great issue to that shooting. And some of them have expressed they will look to buy their own body cameras if they have to.
Wow.
What do you make about that?
Thanks for that question, Sean. Sean, I'll tell you this. Let me make it abundantly clear. The vast majority of police officers that serve in the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service are professional, they are very competent, and we should be all proud of the work that they do to protect and serve the people of Trinidad and Tobago. We should be very proud of them. Unfortunately, this Samaru killing is tainting the entire police service, especially those who give of their life on a daily basis to protect and serve the people of Trinidad and Tobago. The management, the communication surrounding this particular incident has destroyed and or undermined these hardworking officers and has literally destroyed the trust and the confidence that we, the public, need to have in the Trinidad and Tobago police service. There was an incident that occurred on the weekend, I think it was on Sunday, where a group of protesters showed up in front of the parliament and to express their concerns about the killing, and rightly so. They were not doing anything wrong. They did not pose a threat to national security. They just assembled to express their concerns. This was an opportunity, as far as I am concerned, for the management of the police service to go there and have an open conversation with the protesters and to give the assurance that this matter is going to be thoroughly investigated and the chips will fall where they may. And to give the assurance to the Samaru family that an expeditious, independent, unbiased investigation into this matter is being conducted and there will be no cover-up. The police service and the management of the police service mishandled the situation again because their response was sending the riot squad to a group of unarmed persons who just showed up in front of the parliament when there was no sitting of the parliament, so there was no issue there with respect to law and order and national security. And they responded by sending riot police officers to disperse a very small group of unarmed protesters. Mishandled again. Mishandled and bungled again. What compounded the matter is that last week Friday, I posed two urgent questions to the Minister of Homeland Security. Let me tell you what the two questions are. To the Minister of Homeland Security, can you assure that a full and independent investigation into the Samaru killing, where video recording or CCTV camera footage has shown us Mr. Samaru surrendering to the police, can you assure that a full and independent investigation into this matter will be done? I provided the minister with a platform to speak in the parliament to the Samaru family and to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago to assure that they're going to be a full and independent and they're not going to be a cover-up. The minister invoked Standing Order 27-1G not to respond to the question. What does that tell you? He was not prepared to give that assurance in the national parliament. And that should concern all of us. The second question I asked him, can the Minister of Homeland Security state what support is being given to the Samaru family on this matter, where CCTV footage showed that it was a killing when there was an apparent surrender by one of the victims? Can you give or explain what support is being given by the state or the TPS or the TTPS or by the TTPS to the Samaru family? The minister did not seize upon the opportunity on this question to tell the population what support is being given. Instead, he invoked Standing Order 27-1G not to respond to the question. When you add all of that together, Sean, it is a frightening and bizarre picture that should concern every citizen of Trinidad and Tobago. And I end on that.
I think, yeah, it seems as though he was given instructions, yeah, just whatever they ask you, say this. That's my suspicion.
And when he invoked 27-1G, there was large desk thumping on the part of the government supporting the minister's position on this.
I know that you have to run, so feel free to be very short on this, but independent bodies like the PCA, should it be strengthened or do we need something stronger? Because I feel as though we're not really getting the results that we need.
It should be strengthened. If you look at the past reports of the PCA and the lack of resources and the challenges that it faced to execute its legislative mandate, it should. I think there's a lot there's enough said in the public domain and in the reports of the PCA that we need to go and examine what is taking place inside of there. And it may not be legislative changes, but it's a commitment that the government should give to the PCA to provide all of the resources that are necessary so that it can execute its mandate. You see, you can have all of the powers in law, but you can't simply. It's like the Integrity Commission. It's like the TTPS. You have all of the powers, but if you are not given the resources to do your work, it simply doesn't make sense. And that is exactly what is taking place with the PCA. The last reports that they have laid, annual reports that they have laid, they've basically complained about resources. And I think given what is taking place in our society today, the PCA needs to be strengthened insofar as resources are concerned so that they can discharge their mandate. And in so doing, the confidence that the population needs to have in the TTPS will be it will be returned, and once that is returned, you have a good working collaboration between the TTPS and the citizens, and with that confidence level being high, you can have a more willingness on the part of the population to cooperate with the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. And once you have that cooperation taking place, the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service will be more successful in ensuring that we have law and order in this country.
Well, Mr. Gonzalez, I know that you have a very busy morning. I don't know if you want to potentially just tell the public, where they could see you later on today or...
Oh, yeah. So today's our weekly news conference. We normally would have it on a Wednesday, but unfortunately we could not have had it yesterday because there was a visit by the IMF to the leader of the opposition's office, because the IMF is in the country at this point in time conducting their usual consultation. And yesterday they met with officials at the leader of the opposition's office. So we had to reschedule our weekly news conference to today. So at 10:30, we will be having our weekly press conference. I will be there to speak on some issues that were brought to my attention in the Ministry of Public Utilities. Mr. Brian Manning will speak on financial and economic matters. Hans Devines, MP Hans Devines, will speak on issues concerning Carnival and the management of Carnival in this country. We will also touch on the issues with respect to the HDC and the scandal that we have unearthed there a couple of days ago. And the board is doing one thing without the knowledge of the minister. We'll deal with that. The Sea Bridge issues where food stuff is running low in Tobago, and people and our citizens in Tobago not having access to food supplies, etc. So it is going to be a very informative news conference, and we expect and we invite members of the national community to join us there because we will have quite a lot to say.
Well, folks, that is Opposition Chief Whip Marvin Gonzalez, and I'll just say this. He was more than brave enough to come and join us on Talking Point. If you want to say that we're only offering one side, encourage someone from the government to come and speak as well. Mr. Gonzalez was more than willing, and I hope others would follow his example because there's not enough, not just on Talking Point. You could go to whatever show you want, but I personally would like to see more of our elected officials and not necessarily see things or hear about things only via Twitter. Mr. Gonzalez, thanks for joining us once again.
And thank you very much for having me. Looking forward to another invitation.
Yes, we will speak again. Folks, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll open the phone lines. Mr. Gonzalez is very busy. He's got to go, but we'll be right back after this.
Join the Face of Sports host, Andre Batiste, alongside his NFL co-host, Sean Michael Small, at the WESN Super Bowl watch party. The location, Murray's on Moco Rapa Road, Super Bowl 60, Patriots versus Seahawks. Join us to watch the conclusion of a great season of American football, the spectacle of the halftime show, and the phenomenon of Super Bowl ads, 6 p.m. February 8th, McMurray's on Moco Rapo Road. See you there.
Hi, I am Emiliana Beechan and I am a mental health and conflict resolution consultant. Welcome to Mind Matters, the show where we explore the intricate world of mental health and the art of conflict resolution. Join us as we hear from mental health professionals, conflict resolution experts, and everyday people who have transformed their lives through understanding and communication. Mind Matters, coming soon to WESN Content Capital.
Last year, you had the time of your life.
Amplia.
This year will be even more fantastic. Get your tickets now for Gone But Not Forgotten 2.
I feel like home.
They gave us the memory.
Woman, you could run away too.
They gave us the rhythms of life. Now let's give them their flowers.
Trinidad and Tobago, join us for a special tribute to our legendary musical icons who have passed on in Gone But Not Forgotten.
Including Bunny, Swallow, Singing Francine, Shadow, Arrow, Maestro, Rootsman, Blacks, Sandoli, Ras Shorty Eye, plus lots more. Their music still lives on in our heart. An unforgettable night as we celebrate their legacy in Gone But Not Forgotten. Wednesday, February 4th at Napa and Thursday, February 5th at Sapa. Showtime both nights, 6:30 p.m. Your master of ceremonies, Sonny Bling.
Tickets $300 and $250.
Early bird tickets bought by Monday, January 26th. Cost $50 less.
Available at Crosby's, Jumbo Foods Barataria, Mart's Liquor Palace, Digomate Main Road, All Kenny Sports, Western Union, Tunabuna, All Extra Foods, Athletes by the Park, and IslandEtickets.com. An extra $10 off for online purchases. For more info, call 732-3402. Gone, but not forgotten.
As you come in. Long time I see you. This station complete. Ready for children party. Mommy! Jay, you can't go nowhere with these children. And you know you can't depend on Kevin neither Steven to see about them. Yeah. Total waste. So I supposed to stay home the whole time? Jada is 12. She could see about them. You just leave Jada to see about Kira and Kayla? I thought it was your mother or your sister. Who? Them always busy. Jada could handle that. She cooking and cleaning a long time. And the next two, better know what time it is. It's only me, you know. I will talk to my mother. She just home these days. She will make sure the children okay. Alright. Let me see the moves for later.
Before you ramage, make sure the children okay. Call 996 to report all child abuse now. A message from the Children's Authority of Trinidad and Tobago.
Welcome back to Talk About the WSND Content Capital. We just had a conversation with Opposition Chief Whip and former Minister of Public Utilities. Although we weren't able to necessarily speak on his former portfolio, I believe that is part of what he's going to be speaking about at the press conference, the opposition's press conference later today. Things like this, I think we need to subscribe to a little bit more. It's one of the few areas where the media is able to interact with politicians. I do think, though, that more needs to be done with regards to getting messages out there. However, one could argue whoever's in government should be doing more, right? Kind of weird to see that in some cases the UNC in specific time periods, from my vantage point, at times are doing less than they did when they were in opposition, which is kind of weird. It's kind of weird, but not necessarily going to harp too much on that. We open up the phone lines now. There's also a comment to get to that speaks directly to the interview, so I don't know if you could put the comment up. You identified your stance this morning. Why did you not ask the minister during his tenure why there were no enforcement of body cameras? Well, the former minister, I would imagine. He was at one point in time Minister of National Security. He was appointed the day after Stuart Young was appointed as Prime Minister, if my memory serves correct. Stuart Young is appointed as Prime Minister, and I can't remember if there was also the AG appointed. That's the minimum to constitute a cabinet and a government. And if on the same day the rest of the cabinet was appointed, or if it was the day after. But what I do know is, what I believe happened, if memory serves correct, the day after Stuart Young's cabinet was appointed, he called elections. So Mr. Gonzalez was only Minister of National Security for a couple of weeks. Nothing really happened during that time, and you can't really, it's very difficult to do any kind of policy or budgetary decisions on an institution like that in a matter of weeks. Minister Hines was the Minister of National Security. Mr. Gonzalez was the Minister of Public Utilities for at least the last the last term in the PNM's time in office. And at the very least, I don't think he could necessarily directly speak to such things. I don't know if he was on the National Security Council at any point in time during that period. And two, it's not like he was doing nothing. Mr. Gonzalez was only a few ministers, I would argue, and some others would, that was actually accomplishing things with regards to trying to treat with the water supply in the country. You know, every year there would be several new plants or facilities being opened up, and including facilities opened up not too long after the election, which probably was started before the election. So it wasn't like he was doing nothing and he could have gone into someone else's portfolio. So if Minister Hines was on, that question would have been more pertinent. Also, technically speaking, former Commissioner of Police Garth Griffith under the PNM government, he did get body cameras. So yes, there's a time after him that we could ask, but it's not quietly the person directly responsible. So to what extent can he actually speak on it? That does matter, believe it or not. And I have made that consideration for members of both parties throughout the years of this show, from the very beginning. We have Digger Martin on the line that's been waiting patiently. Caller, good morning, you're on the air.
Yeah, good morning, Sean. I listened attentively to some of the points that the former Minister of National Security, and I wasn't really too impressed with his utterances. And I want to introduce the term this morning with respect to the TTPS, and this is my term, institutional amnesia. And why are we having the cry out now for the police to fix their organization? And that is an organization has collapsed a long ago. The fact is, it needs strong leadership, and the protocol used basically to the hierarchy of the leadership of the police service has been flawed. The recent judgment about using cell phone and body cameras, that is incidental to the symptoms of the police service. How many judgments have been made against senior officers and there have not been an outcry? Let me pinpoint this also legislation where a senator basically identified the perpetrator of active chambers, and there is not an outcry to get it right because the police was complicit to that. And I'm saying the proliferation of the bad leadership of the police came, and I've continued to say, out of the day of policing, because these people for the days of the policing that has been complicit has been catapulted into the leadership of the police. So if you have a flawed leadership, a leadership who does not understand management, etc., they will create an organization with what we have. Gary Griffith was one of these people, was catapulted. They mash up the meritocracy list and the parliament designed, and he eventually became the commissioner of police. And had three people before him, they didn't want it, because that's why I say it is designed to give us what we want. And he did something I have to give him kudos for. He did an organizational job. But what he did, he populated with people out of the day of policing. And that is something we have to understand. The police service has been used as a political football, and we started back to Dr. Eric Williams when he had a special unit to go after his perpetrators. Yesterday, on another TV program, I think he's the policy director of Homeland Security, a policeman, he has said, and he questioned a number of things within the police. And one thing he has said, has the officers in the TTPS have a command about their responsibility, and a lot of policemen apparently doesn't have that, and that is the recruitment and the promotional aspect of the protocol is flawed because you could choose who you want to be at the top. Look, for example, so many judgments against them, and one in particular, we haven't been able to get a simple answer. Who gave the instructions to go and abduct Brent Thomas? A simple thing like that is the most difficult thing for the police to give us an answer on that. Likewise, the Aki Chambers, you have the information out there, and the police waiting for somebody to come and tell them so and so and so. Again, I'm very passionate about it, and I don't believe we're making progress. And as the gentleman from the Police Service Director of Homeland Security said, we need legislation to fix the police, and we need not one person, as we have COP Guevara now, we need several people in the leadership to transform the police. Again, have a nice morning.
Thanks, caller. Just to respond to one of your first points, we have a caller waiting, so I can't respond to everything. But one of the reasons why we go into these cycles of, well, the new commissioner, the new minister, what are they going to do? We try to give them a chance. I would argue maybe the time frame should be short because of the severity of the situation. But there was some hope that the new commissioner will turn the page. The new minister, for whatever his pre-existing criticisms are, might offer something new. And then we have a very severe example that might be more blatant than anything else in recent memory, right? To some extent, even more blatant than the Mobile triple shooting, because that wasn't quite as clear on camera as to how that went down in this case, right? At least if my memory is correct. So when we start to see issues, then the criticisms come back anew, and you would say, well, yes, but some of these things have been there before. I understand that, but similar how I'm not necessarily, look, when I speak about the Minister of Works or the Minister of Culture, I'm not including my criticisms to the Minister of Homeland Security. So I'm not trying to like broad brush when it's specific criticisms. It's what a specific person said or how a specific person acted. I could say that the rest of the government is silent on the matter. So I could say with regards to Marvin Gonzalez, I'm not going to use the specific criticisms of national security against him. You can't criticize him for not speaking out against it. But on some level, that it ends there. Unless he himself does something that shows that his behavior is in line with the criticisms of another minister, or he involves himself, like how, you know, Minister Stage and the AG are also involved in the social debate, even though it really should be the Minister of Homeland Security championing that cause, at least in the lower house. In the Senate, the AG, fine. I guess that's okay. We do have Shogunas waiting on the line. Caller, good morning. You on here?
Good morning, Sean.
Morning.
This state of emergency shows you the cause of our problem. We never find out the reason for the problem. We try to sit down and solve the problem by looking at the effect. The problem is law and order. If the town and country planning law was enforced, the squatting law was enforced because the government had a date for letters of comfort, and that was over 25 years ago, or 20 years ago. And nobody is doing anything about enforcing law in Trinidad. You look at the state of the roads in Trinidad, it's obvious the minister and them is not doing anything to deal with it. And one of the reasons for that is this question of giving out contracts. I think contracts long ago in the public service was for short-term matter, or when somebody had work to finish after his retirement age and things like that. Now you're giving out contract and nobody is checking the quality of what is produced. Any questions or comments or queries?
That's an interesting point. I never necessarily heard that. One would think with regards to contract workers, it would be easier to uphold them to certain productivity standards.
Really? One
would think. No, because they're on contract, isn't it easier to fire them or at the very least not renew the contract?
I went through in the beginning and I would tell you that the easiest person to fire is a public servant.
Well,
because you have the regulation saying exactly what you are supposed to do, and if the public servant the senior fellows don't do it, the minister have a oversight job which they don't do.
But I would argue that for whatever reason, in modern times, and it could be because the Public Service Commission and the Teaching Service Commission and whoever else, because I don't know if the minister could just outright fire a tenured public servant.
No, you don't fire.
Right.
You report the matter to the Public Service Commission.
Yeah, but I feel as though the entire system is broken. And
not the system. It's the people you put to work.
Well,
the ministers as well.
Yeah, well, not just the ministers. I mean, I will agree with you that on some level the politicians have...
Not some level, at the total level, because they're the one with oversight.
Right, but however, regardless of where it started or how it started...
Not where it started, it's where it ended.
But I think, Professor, some of the public servants now, they maintain that status quo, right?
What status quo? Because the ministers are not doing the work.
Well, no, but I think on some level now, when the ministers started to not necessarily have proper oversight with regards to their ministries, right? The elements of the public service got into the practice of kind of doing whatever they wanted in that regard.
Exactly.
To put it simply.
Because the ministers not doing the work.
Right, but
deal with the cause of the problem.
But now, depending on the situation, it's not so simple to fix it quickly.
Why not so simple?
Because unless the minister has the ability to fire individuals directly.
No, you don't have to fire. There's a procedure in the public service that if somebody is doing something wrong, first of all, you have to notify them. And if they don't deal with it, then you report the matter through a chain of command.
Right, and
once you follow that, you have no problem.
And what happens is then the person cries for political persecution and maybe Service Commission.
They cry out. So what?
I mean,
look, there's a procedure. You could go to court with that. You will go to the Privy Council.
Case in point, the Revenue Authority and WASA basically use the election. Sorry, not the Revenue Authority. Customs and the Board of Inland Revenue and the Public Service Association basically use the election to get the UNC to protect them from the former administration.
No, they didn't to get the 10% increase. And
no, but the WASA report,
more than 10%.
The WASA report was also thrown out. Whether you agree?
But the WASA report is a waste.
Well,
nobody is checking why WASA have a problem.
But caller, the WASA report could have been wrong. But the current government hasn't.
It's not wrong. It is not proper.
Fine,
but
the current government hasn't. The current government has not then said what they're going to do to fix WASA as an alternative.
There's no alternative about enforcing.
No.
Do you know that long ago, WASA used to do most of the work in house?
Right. No, what I'm saying is,
whole big team, but they're giving out everything in contract.
As an alternative to the report, if they wanted to scrap the report, that's fine. But
why don't they give you all to discuss the report on the
I'm not sure if.
Right, and then we could call in and talk about it.
Well, I mean, at this point,
bring the minister works on the thing. You ever see how they fix roads in Trinidad on it?
If I ever saw what?
How they fix roads. The roads.
Yeah.
Right? If you go back 50 years ago, we shall fix road better when we should do everything by hand. Now we have all kind of fancy equipment and we can't fix our road.
Yes.
You see, when you fix when you see us pothole up here a long time, They should come quick and fill it up with soft material, right? Until they have on the schedule to do the proper thing. Now that little fill it up, die the end of it. Because long ago when you have a pothole, you dig it out, you get to the bottom to see where you fix seeping out. You seal it back with tar, and then you put up aggregate at different level. Then you pave it, and then you roll it, and in that days was hand rollers. And right now we have all kind of steam rollers, and we don't do it. We don't do the job because the minister doesn't enforce it.
Caller, sorry, I'm going to have to end it there because I think someone else was trying to call on. But thanks for calling in. I understand where you're coming from. Specifically on WhatsApp, I'm just saying, I'm not seeing the current government making any attempt to fix what I believe you would agree with me is a situation that is not working, right? From what I understand, and I know you might disagree with this, right? So I'm not saying this is the absolute truth. But from what I understand, there's resistance in the public sector to change, essentially, right? And we have created this monster that is going to be difficult to sort out now. And it started with politicians long time ago, probably. But it has evolved into this thing where it is not the public sector, I believe is not what it used to be. Because some of the things that you're mentioning, not to say this in a bad way, but actually in a positive way, it's almost as though things were a simpler time then and people just kind of did what they said they were going to do. Let's take the comment. Let's take the comment quick. Yeah, didn't the PCA need more staff over the last 9 PNM years? Now, I actually thought part of the problem with the PCA was also legislatively. Like, I don't know to what extent they could compel certain things. Like, to me, they should be able to tell the police service, you don't have a choice in the matter. Give us the body camera footage or else. So to me, that's part of what I was looking at with regards to strengthening. With regards to resources, that's fair to say because Mr. Gonzalez did say it. The only thing that I can say, and this is not a full explanation, is he wasn't the minister. So, yes, the opposition does have that situation where they find themselves talking about things and it's coming across in this manner. He wasn't the minister. He was also not the minister of finance. So financial considerations, it's not that straightforward or simple. And yes, one could argue there was a need for the PCA to be in a better position in the past. But I'm trying to be fair. To me, the DPP was more of a situation where we spoke about the staff and the resources. Because in my mind, I understand they probably need more resources to deal with, because there's a lot of lower level complaints, right? But these big things, which on some level, because the PCA is not really a criminal investigative body. So on some level, I'm more concerned about how things are set up, because the criminal investigative body to investigate crimes committed by TTPS officers, from what I remember talking to the media ambassadors throughout the last 4 years, or the last 2 to 3 years, is the TTPS. The TTPS investigates himself with regards to criminal matters. In the case of the shooting, you could still file a complaint, but that's part of the reason why I don't think the PCA could compel the police to hand over evidence like body camera footage. And that's why David West complained about not having access to body camera footage. Initially, my complaints with the PCA was it seemed as though he's doing nothing. And I was then informed, well, no, there's certain things that he just can't do, right? So it's not he himself is being, willfully toothless. It's that the PCA as an institution can only go so far. They only have so much authority. So I actually was looking at it from that direction. Mr. Gonzalez answered it somewhat generally, but also he specified resources. But that wasn't really what I was looking for. He did say it, and to some extent, yes, you could criticize the previous administration. Because it's one of those things where, similar to body cameras, I get it, you're not, because I've said it for both the PNM and the UNC governments, there's economic challenges. But I would have prioritized things like body cameras, but also the DPP's office and the PCA to whatever degree is necessary. For specific cases like the Samaru killing, I don't think it's a matter of the amount of resources you have, as opposed to do you have the specific tools to treat with these significant high public interest situations that I don't want to just say violence, because it could also include things like the Akil Chambers lack, as Mr. Digicel pointed out. So it's not necessarily like violent crime stuff, although sexual assault, sexual abuse, I don't know if you would technically classify that as violence, but it's still severe. So severe complaints. You know, these top end of the severity of the danger to public safety, of the heinousness of the crime. You know, that might be more, not so much a question of resources, because you could prioritize that with the resources you have. Not getting results on these, and it might be somewhat questionable, right? You might not like it, but I'm saying it's not as though the majority of cases are at the level of the Akil Chambers situation or the Samaru killing. So the fact that we can't even get some kind of results on that, because the temptation would be, oh, these are high profile cases, so we'll treat it differently. But it seems like we can't even do that. And to me, that to a degree at least, if not in its entirety, is because we set up the PCA and we have these expectations of them and we want them to do things, but they actually just can't do it. And you can put more money into them, but it's not going to change those circumstances. That's my fear. That's my fear. We have San Fernando on the line. Caller, good morning. Are you here?
Good morning, Sean.
Morning.
Okay, thanks for that interview. I see, but you know, politicians only like to come on your program once they're in opposition, it looks like.
No, to be fair, Minister Gonzalez, former Minister Gonzalez, I believe he came on talking point at least twice as Minister of Public Utilities. He was one of the few ministers to come on, to be fair to him.
Hey, but I'm saying it's always easier to get opposition politicians, because since this new government in power, how many of them have you gotten onto your program? When Ms. Lotfridia used to be there almost every week, then Dr. Mayhew. And anyway, let's go past that. I want to go back to the point of the police service.
Yes.
Mr. Digicel said something this morning about it started with the day of policing. I think what I want to say about that day of policing, that was the day that the police tried to prove a point to the government.
Mm-hmm.
And we have more power than you think. That is how I saw that day of policing.
Mm-hmm.
And Mr. Alexander, at the time, was a member of the executive of the Social Welfare Association of the Police Service. He was one of the members of the executive. And now he is the Minister of National Security, Homeland Security. So that tells you the point that Mr. Digicel tried to make. He was part of the hierarchy now.
Yes.
Now, let me say this about fixing the police service. We have within the police service, we have the Professional Standards Bureau, which is supposed to be the internal affairs investigative unit of the police service. We have the PCA, which is an oversight body that you can lodge a complaint and they can investigate and they can take their findings to the police service commissioner, to the PSB and to the DPP.
Mm-hmm.
We also have the Police Service Commission, who has oversight over the police service. So I dare say, based on I know I'm going to Mr. Shagonas, professor, what the professor said. With all these oversight, all these people looking in and at the police service have a role. The people in charge of the police service don't want to fix it, Sean.
Mm-hmm.
And I dare say the politicians don't want to fix it either. Because you can't tell me that they have all these bodies there and the crap still continuing. And before the day of policing, this thing has been going on for decades in this country, this police service. And it seems to be nobody can fix it. And it can't fix itself internally. There's nobody in the police service, in the hierarchy, to say, let us try and fix this thing ourselves. Let's fix it. From the divisional commander, nobody. It's ridiculous. And to see now this situation with Mr. Samaru, and we have a commissioner that seemingly refuses to come and be objective in the matter. Just be objective. Just come out with the. I don't know why it is they keep putting up this wall anytime anything happens with a police officer. It's this big wall to protect at all costs, protect one another at all costs. Come on, man. We've had enough of this. We have had the population have enough of this. I said no, Mr. Guevara don't need no honeymoon period. He hasn't been a police officer for 2 days. Even if he been trusted the position of commissioner, he has had a high-ranking position in the police service where he understands what needs to be done in the service. It's so disgusting. Have a good day, Sean.
Thanks, caller. Well, here's the thing. I can't prove it, and I don't know how widespread it is, but it seems as though too many senior police officers are more concerned about career advancement and office politics than actually, doing the job. The Brent Thomas matter and the arrest of Ayla could be seen as political. And at the time, DCP Martin was associated with the PSB. I believe she was in charge of the PSB at one point in time. At the very least, that shows it's a unit internal to the TTPS. So you're investigating yourself, right? Now, I don't know if the PSB is viewed as some might view internal affairs that you see on American television as like, the rat squad. That's separate to the actual police force. That's the narrative, or that's the trope in Hollywood, right? But that's the PSB at the end of the day is himself investigating himself. First division officers himself investigating himself. I think the PCA might be closer to the Office of Procurement Regulation in that, do they actually have the capacity to go far enough in certain situations? Because you file a complaint. Hey, the officer, he was rough with me. He abused me. He verbally abused me. He was insulting. He slapped me. He was physically abusive. Investigating a police shooting, I don't know if that's technically primarily in the PCA's purview. You can make a complaint about it as the survivor, I believe would or should. But it's not like the PCA is we investigate police shootings, right? So now you have a situation where the public has a very bad perception of the service, and it doesn't seem to be a body independent enough. Because as you point out, the leadership, they seem to want to always circle wagons. And I would argue, the real police officers, they don't go past a certain rank. That's what it seems like. The real police officers that ironically understand how to communicate to the public. You have these office politicians who are not dissimilar to parliamentarian politicians who don't understand. And maybe it's because when you get to that level, now you're less sure of yourself, the stakes are higher, but they don't seem to understand how to engage with the public, what to say, what not to say, how things might look or come across when they say certain things. And I wonder if it's, because I've had this theory with with politicians, their skill is internal party politics, jockeying for position. And the tricks and the tools and the strategies that they use there, whether subconsciously or consciously, try to apply it when they're in government, particularly. In opposition, it's maybe less apparent, but when they're in government, and it doesn't work. because they're accustomed to doing things a certain way in their internal party politics, and that does not really prepare them for governance. Likewise, I am now thinking, when what you're doing is you're looking at career advancement, right? So how are you doing that? It's not the field guy, it's the person in headquarters that gets good relationships with the higher ups, right? That looks good in certain situations and avoids the blame in other situations. That's always jockeying for position. And at times, they spend a lot of time as a headquarters weenie, as a REMF, rare echelon, you could fill in the rest, those who know, right? And they're not necessarily out in the field, some of them. And because of that, they're visible to the seniors and to the superiors and to the politicians and the public, you know, and they look important and blah, 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 blah. But potentially, they're not actually proficient in policing. And then somehow they're also not proficient in public communications, which is, to me, very weird. And that lack of ability, because all of the tricks that they use to advance their career, look, Ayla made it to commissioner. And she had to know something to do something to get to that point. But whatever it is that whatever skills she amassed throughout her career, she was completely unprepared to be commissioner. It was completely inappropriate to appoint as commissioner because McDonald Jacobs knew not to answer that question. He knew not to rate himself. And somehow she thought it was a good idea. Months into her time with nothing to show for it. Oh, my performance is excellent. Like, even if it is, you don't say it. You have other people say it. You can't say it. The lack of awareness in that moment showed her skill set, not prepared. She was administration. There were administration problems on her tenure. Guevara's intelligence, I would argue we have not necessarily seen him take his area, apparently, of his career track, so that should be his area of expertise, and improve it in any meaningful way that we could perceive, right? And you could say, well, maybe there are things that we can't perceive. Well, at the end of the day, it actually makes sense that the guy that spent most of his time in intelligence and not talking to the public, as much as he seems to be a very good orator, does not actually understand or has the judgment of when and how and what to communicate with the public in critical situations, in crisis management, right? You saw actually some of the best of it in the initial days of COVID, and then you saw some of the worst of it, you know, in the back half of the government at the time managing COVID, amongst other things. Also, you saw the worst of it with how national security was managed over the last 3 years at the very minimum, because then Minister Hines kind of said mostly nothing, and what very little he did say was of questionable effectiveness, to say the least, right? Let's see what, we have another comment, let's put up the comment, switching gears a little bit. WASA should bottle water for sale. The problem with that is if WASA tried to sell bottled water, I suspect they would either lose money or their prices would be higher than the private bottlers, because their labor costs would probably be too high. You know what? This might be a way to expose government inefficiencies, but government inefficiencies on some level is unfortunately intrinsic for whatever reason, and maybe it's because all governments are corrupt, and when I say all, I don't mean no matter what party. I mean our country, some other country, America, UK, you know, Japan. There's corruption in South Korea. There's corruption in all governments, and the public sector will always be inefficient because of some level of either outright corruption or allowance of laziness, lack of productivity. And this might expose that. But history and theory highly suggests, history both of all situations of government productivity in just about every country, almost, except maybe Singapore, right? And our own individual history of our nation, as well as theory, suggests that if WASA tried to bottle water for sale, they will be so inefficient, either they will be losing a lot of money per bottle, or it might be significantly more expensive than any other bottled water, in which case they'll have no sales, right? The loss in money would be they would have to sell at a competitive price, but they're so inefficient, their costs will be so high because of their bloated staffing levels, or just the production lines might not be operating optimally or efficiently, that their cost of productions will be higher than the private sector's. Potentially. Now, that is assuming the private sector has their act together. If the private sector is very inefficient themselves, then it's fine. WASA could compete. I would imagine to some extent, if the private sector was inefficient, given the amount of bottled water we have in the country, I would be surprised if that is the case. But if the private sector is inefficient in its operations across the board, and WASA comes and do this just for the sake of an extra competitor, that might be a financial incentive for them to get their act together. Whereas the government doesn't really respond to financial incentives quite that way, right? It will turn into a jobs program. Oh, you know, we have a party supporter, he needs a job, we'll put him in the bottled water factory. That's what it'll turn into. I mean, if they could do that for police and the defense force, especially the defense force, if they could do that for other aspects of the government and the ministries, not just CPEP and URP, the port, they could do that for the port. I'm not saying it. Michael Anna said on this show years ago, said it. They could do it for a bottled water factory. So I'm not necessarily looking. I like that suggestion, not necessarily for the reasons that you might think. Just gonna wrap things up here. We're way over time, but yes, I agree. Ultimately speaking, we do need to do something about the leadership of the police service, and also Homeland Security. But those are two separate things. Minister Alexander does not appreciate the fact that as a former police officer, that is going to work against him at times. Particularly now, when he's basically saying, trust the police. That's nice, but he's not the usual civilian oversight telling us trust the police. He is a former police officer whose career was made as a police officer telling us trust the belief. It's hard to look at him as an unbiased commenter, right? This is one of the reasons why, for national security especially, you kind of don't always want someone from the ranks to be the civilian oversight authority, because certain things just don't work as effectively. But also, he seems to be very well content with the status quo of the police service. And that status quo has led us to 8% trust and confidence, has led us to some of the inability to deal with crime without a state of emergency or zones of special operations. That status quo has led to multiple instances of police shootings. PCA says police shootings are up. The ones that we know of anyway. That's number one. Number two, there are other instances which happened under the previous administration, yes, of people dying in custody, whether by prisons or by the police service. And his wanting to seemingly defend the status quo, whether it is intentional or not, and if it's not intentional, then he needs to improve his public messaging, because he's not doing himself any help. His wanting to potentially defend the status quo and maintain the status quo basically implies, I'm good with all of this. I'm good with these people dying before they had their day in court. I'm fine with trampling on the rights of others. It's no issue to me. I endorse this message as Minister of Homeland Security. And again, if it's not intentional, then somebody needs to give him a course on public communications, because that's how, to me, he comes across. And to me, it seems very obvious. That's why I think he needs to be let go, because it's very hard, given his background, to say certain things and for it not to come across as the wrong thing. With regards to the Commissioner of Police, that whole process needs to change. Because I think at this point, I don't think the public could have confidence in the system. Some people might say, what's wrong? Things are fine. You have confidence because your political party is in government. You don't have confidence in the system. If elections happen tomorrow and the party is swapped, you won't be as confident. And that's the issue. You can't say that a system is fine if in reality you're placing confidence in the individual people in charge in the moment. That's not confidence in a system. Just because you think it works with one person, there will come a point in time when somebody else has to be there. That is just natural human progression. So it doesn't matter how much trust and confidence you have in the government, that you think that they could work with the system. Kamala Prasad says not going to be prime minister forever. So you could have infinite trust and confidence in, hey, if the system is flawed, at the very least, once she's gone, the flaws will sooner or later show themselves in a bad way. This system needs to be changed because I don't think the public could trust in the system of selecting the police leadership anymore. And to some extent, the Police Service Commission also. It's in a bad way. It's in a really bad way. And I don't think just replacing the people is enough. I think the whole situation needs to be overhauled, right? Something better needs to come about that could provide greater accountability and transparency to try to ensure that we don't have all of the Mickey Mouse nonsense that we've seen with the position of Commissioner of Police. We had an acting commissioner for, 8 years? Then we had one substantial commissioner who is very popular for many people, but also unpopular with some. Then he was removed in a very controversial manner. Then we had an acting commissioner for a little while who was, to some extent, a lame duck commissioner. Then we had another commissioner who provided us with nothing. Then we had another acting commissioner who actually gave us some good results with the SOE, but it was with an SOE. And now we have the current commissioner who is mishandling this shooting. Probably, I don't know if it could be mishandled any worse, to be honest, without outright being belligerent. I am way over time, so I'll end things there. Thanks to the callers. Thanks to Opposition Chief Whip Marvin Gonzalez for joining us. Thanks to the commenters. As always, if you disagree with me and I disagree with you, that's fine. Getting the perspectives is what's matter. We just need to all remember to be respectful. Hey, myself included. Don't be afraid to always call me out. Stay safe. Remember your leaders of the Republic and to each other. Don't forget to be nice to each other. We'll see each other tomorrow. Bye-bye.
WESN.
Good day and welcome to another episode of Strictly Legal on WESN Content Capital. I am your host, Rondell Donovan, attorney at law. Once again, I'm happy to bring the law and you. Of course, you can stream us on our social media as well as our traditional media, WESN, CC, as well as Strictly Legal with Rondell Donovan. So this week we are about to speak about dental quacks. It's a bit of going non-traditional because, of course, my guest is not a lawyer. She is an oral surgeon, Dr. Kimberly Abraham, and we're going to speak about about the need to crack down on unregistered and unlicensed dentists, because we've seen a lot in Trinidad and Tobago because of our influx of I don't want to use the word loosely, but migrants, and also a lot of different types of persons who come to Trinidad, and even persons who are Trinidad nationals who are operating at home procedures, and whether that is safe, that is proper.